The story begins late at night in Chicago, where a police car speeds through the streets toward the hospital with a shot officer. Rushed immediately into surgery, the staff calls for Paul, the best surgeon in the hospital. Paul asks another doctor to finish up his current procedure and hurries to save the cop, but by the time he gets there, it is already too late. The officer has died, and Paul stands there for a moment before moving on because this is the job, and this is his life. The next morning, Paul has breakfast with his wife Lucy and their daughter Jordan, who has just been accepted to college in New York. The whole family is genuinely happy about the news. Afterward, they all go to watch Jordan play in a soccer match. Paul and Lucy are loud and enthusiastic supporters in the stands, but a father nearby cannot stop yelling and complaining about every small detail on the pitch. Paul politely asks the man to lower his voice, and the man takes immediate offense. The argument escalates quickly, and the man tries to get physical with Paul. Lucy has to step in and pull her husband away, while the man calls Paul a coward as they walk off. After the game, the family goes to a pizza restaurant with Paul's brother Frank. Over the meal, Paul agrees to lend Frank $2,000, prompting Frank to make a joke about Paul's salary. This conversation is overheard by the valet, Miguel, who is parking their car. Miguel also hears that the family will be out of the house that night. When he goes to get the car, he quietly takes a photo of the address saved on the vehicle's navigation system. That small act in an ordinary parking lot is what sets everything into motion. That evening, the family is getting ready to go out and celebrate Paul's birthday, and they give him a beautiful new watch as a gift. Before they can leave, the hospital calls, and Paul has no choice but to go in. Lucy and Jordan decide to go grocery shopping instead. When they return home later that night, a van is parked just around the corner from the house. Jordan goes upstairs to call her girlfriend, leaving Lucy alone in the kitchen baking a birthday cake for Paul. She does not notice the figure standing behind a door in the shadows. Suddenly, Lucy notices that her cookbook has turned to a different page on its own, and she realizes a breeze is coming through a window that should be closed. When she goes to close it, she finds muddy footprints on the floor and understands immediately that someone has broken in. She calls out for Jordan to come downstairs, but it is already too late. A robber hiding in Jordan's bathroom grabs her before she can leave the room. Jordan is brought downstairs, and the full picture becomes clear. There are 3 men inside the house, and they tell Lucy that if she does not cooperate, Jordan will be killed. The leader takes Lucy to the family safe, making her open it and put all their valuables into a bag. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, one of the other men tells his partner to put the knife down and goes outside to look for rope. While they are separated, the man with the knife begins harassing Jordan. When his partner comes back, he tells him to stop, and the two of them start arguing. In that moment of distraction, Jordan grabs the knife and cuts one of the men across the face, but the other man hits her and throws her to the ground. Lucy comes back into the room with the third robber and sees what is happening. Without hesitating, she grabs a pot of boiling water from the stove, throws it at one of the men, and tells Jordan to run. But the men have had enough, and they start shooting. At the hospital, Paul is in the middle of another surgery when he hears over the intercom that 2 female patients are incoming. Something in him stirs. He hands off the procedure to a colleague and runs to help, but the other doctors will not let him anywhere near the case. By the time someone explains why, it is already too late. Lucy is already dead, and Jordan is in surgery fighting for her life. Paul cannot accept it and goes to see Lucy's body himself. The sight of her destroys something in him. Detectives Raines and Jackson arrive to question Paul and take down a list of all the items stolen from a safe. Frank arrives too, shouting at the police about how they never take crime in this area seriously enough, and Paul has to calm his brother down. The detectives promise they will find the people responsible. A nurse then comes to tell Paul that Jordan has survived surgery but is in a coma, and Paul does not leave her side. Sometime later, Lucy's funeral is held, and her father, Ben, speaks at the service. On the drive back, Ben suddenly stops the car in the middle of the road and stares at something on the ground. Without explanation, he drives urgently to his property, where 2 poachers are trespassing. The men immediately start running when they see him. Ben gets out and fires at them, but they escape. Paul is shaken by what he just witnessed, but Ben tells him calmly that you cannot rely on the police because they only show up after a crime has already happened. Sometimes, a man has to handle things himself. Ben then shoots the deer the poachers injured to put it out of its misery. The look on Paul's face shows that Ben's words have landed somewhere deep inside him. Sometime later, Paul is driving and talking on the phone with Detective Raines, hoping for news and getting none. His frustration spills out when a homeless man tries to clean his car window at a red light, and Paul snaps at him. Later, he visits Jordan in the hospital and finds her girlfriend sitting beside her reading aloud, leaving Paul grateful that his daughter is not alone. Paul starts going to therapy. In his sessions, he talks about how he cannot sleep in the bed he and Lucy shared, so he sleeps on the couch. He talks about his childhood riding trains alone to avoid his father, noting that he has started doing that again just to sit and think. He tells the therapist that every suspicious man he passes on the street reminds him of the men who took his wife, and the thing eating him alive is the feeling that he failed to protect his family. The therapist tells him that healing takes time. Paul nods, goes home, and lies on the couch in the dark. Weeks pass with still no update from the police, so Paul goes to see Rains in person to ask about DNA samples. None of them matched anyone in the database. When Paul looks at the board on Rains's wall, covered in open cases with only a small fraction of them solved, he understands clearly the gap between what the system promises and what it can actually deliver. That evening, Paul is leaving a train station when he sees two men harassing a young woman on the street. He tells them to leave her alone, and they turn on him, beating him badly. However, the woman gets away. Paul drags himself home, sits in front of the television, and sees an advertisement for a local gun shop. He stares at it for a long time. The next day, he goes to the shop, and the assistant walks him through everything they have. Because there is paperwork, a safety class required, and cameras everywhere, Paul says he will think about it. Sometime later, Paul is in surgery when a gunshot victim is brought in. When the body is moved, a gun slides out of the patient's pocket. Paul quietly kicks it under the operating table, retrieves it when the room clears, hides it in his clothes, and takes it home. That night, he tries to fire it for the first time. The bullet bounces off the wrong surface, making him realize he does not know what he is doing. He spends every free moment for the next several days watching tutorials and practicing until his aim is something he can trust. When Jordan has a seizure, her condition deteriorates, and the doctors tell Paul it is unlikely she will survive. Paul stands in her room and looks at the straps holding her to the bed to keep her safe during seizures. Something breaks in him completely. His daughter is restrained to a hospital bed while the men who did this to her are walking free somewhere in the city. That night, Paul puts on a dark hoodie and walks into one of the roughest parts of Chicago. He sees two men trying to steal a woman's car and calls them out. They jump in the car and open fire at him. Paul rolls to avoid the bullets, comes up shooting, and hits the driver, causing the car to crash. A piece of glass tears into his hand. The second man gets out and starts shooting blindly. Paul gets behind a car, waits, and then shoots him in the head. A woman watching from an upstairs window films all of it on her phone. Paul tells the robbery victim to run, looks at the driver taking his last breath, and walks away. He drops his hoodie in a trash can and takes the train home. Using his medical training, he cleans and dresses the wound on his hand himself, takes the medication his therapist prescribed, and goes to sleep. The next morning, detectives Rains and Jackson take statements from the witnesses. The woman who was almost robbed is grateful and shaken. The woman who filmed everything thinks the shooter was brutal and cold, and she posts the video online before the detectives can stop her. The video goes viral almost immediately, and the media lights up with debate about whether what the shooter did was justice or vigilantism. The man in the hoodie gets a name, the Grim Reaper. At the hospital, Paul covers the wound on his hand with bandages to make it look smaller. Whenever officers walk past him in the corridors, he slides his hand into his pocket. In the afternoon, a young boy is brought in who has been shot by a local drug dealer. Paul is patient and gentle with him, earning enough trust that the boy quietly tells him the dealer's street name. The ice cream man Paul notes the address from the boy's chart before he is taken to surgery. After his shift, Paul takes another hoodie from the hospital laundry room, goes to the neighborhood, and finds the ice cream man on the street. He shoots him without hesitation and walks away while the locals immediately strip the man's card of everything on it. The detectives arrive at the scene shortly after and hear descriptions of a man in a hoodie again. Rains watches some kids on the street reenacting the shooting and notices that the boy playing the shooter is using his left hand. When he compares it to the viral video, he concludes it was probably the same person. The next day, the media is even louder about the Grim Reaper, and Paul watches the coverage at home with something close to satisfaction. The guilt that gave him nightmares after the first shooting has gone quiet. At the police station, Rains's superior is furious that a vigilante is operating openly in the city and worried that others will start copying him. The only information they have is that the shooter is left-handed and not particularly experienced with firearms. Paul goes back to therapy, where the therapist tells him he looks significantly better and should keep doing whatever he has been doing. Paul smiles and says he will. Some days later, Paul is in surgery working on another gunshot victim when he looks down and realizes the man on the table is Miguel, the valet who photographed his home address on the night everything fell apart. Paul also notices his own stolen watch sitting on Miguel's wrist. Paul's efforts to save him are not exactly his best work, and Miguel dies on the operating table. Paul goes to the ambulance where Miguel was brought in, finds his phone, and unlocks it using Miguel's cold finger. He takes back his watch and slips away to his office, where he goes through Miguel's photos and finds exactly what he feared, a photograph taken from inside his car, confirming that Miguel was the one who gave the robbers the address. He keeps scrolling and finds a picture of a liquor store, but something about it does not look right. Paul considers calling Rains but decides against it, choosing to investigate himself. That evening, he takes another hoodie from the hospital laundry, walks into the liquor store, and tells the owner he is a friend of Miguel's. The owner notices the hospital label still on the hoodie. Keeping a calm face, he quietly sends a message to a criminal associate named Fish, asking him to come over. The owner then reaches under the counter for a revolver, but Paul catches the movement in a mirror on the wall. He drives a bar dart through the man's hand before it gets there, holds him at gunpoint, and demands to see everything stolen from his house. The owner takes him to a safe in the back room, where Paul finds all of it, his family's valuables, everything taken from the safe that night. At that moment, Fish arrives and tries to shoot Paul, but Paul has already spotted him on the security camera monitors and moves. The bullet meant for Paul kills the owner instead. Fish opens fire wildly, forcing Paul to take cover and reload. When Fish slips on the blood spreading across the floor, Paul grabs a guitar from the wall, hits him with it, and shoves furniture in his path. Fish recovers and retreats to the bar, but Paul uses the security cameras to shoot him in the leg and bring him down. He steps on the wound and asks Fish who killed Lucy. Fish tells him it was a mechanic named Joe and that Joe's address is on his phone. As Paul reaches down to take the phone, Fish kicks him hard into a shelf, gets back to his feet, and raises his gun. A bowling ball rolls off the shelf above him, dropping onto his head so that Fish goes down. Paul shoots him, grabs the security hard drives, and leaves, but his wedding ring slips off his finger somewhere in the chaos and he does not notice it fall. At home, Paul watches a video tutorial on how to destroy hard drives with a drill and gets to work. The next day, the media goes even louder about the Grim Reaper. At the hospital, Rains and Jackson show up to see Paul. They have a photograph of Fish, and they also have Paul's ring found at the scene. They assume the ring was among the items stolen from Paul's home on the night of the robbery, so they have come to give Paul the good news that they can finally advance the case. Paul confirms the ring is his and thanks them. After they leave, he destroys Fish's phone. Later, Paul drives to Joe's auto shop and slips inside while Joe is working underneath a car, knocking him unconscious with a wrench. When Joe wakes up, he is tied to the underside of the vehicle, and Paul begins working on him methodically. He gives him an injection, makes a precise cut, and then pours brake fluid directly into the wound. The pain is extraordinary. After enough of it, Joe tells Paul that the man who killed Lucy is named Knock, but nobody goes looking for Knock. You wait for Knox to come to you. Paul thanks him, walks toward the exit, and then pulls a chain that drops the car down on top of Joe. The next day, Rains and Jackson go to see Frank because they have realized that every person the Grim Reaper has killed or hurt is directly connected to the robbery at Paul's house. They want to see Frank's hand. Meanwhile, Paul is at the hospital visiting Jordan, watching on the news that copycat killers have started using the Grim Reaper story as cover for their own crimes. His phone rings. The voice on the other end is Knock, who tells Paul to come to a club in 30 minutes. Paul arrives at the crowded club and messages Knock, who tells him to go to the bathroom. Paul makes his way there, calls Knox's number, and follows the ringing to a stall. He kicks it open and finds only a phone sitting on the lid of the toilet. Suddenly, Knox steps out from behind him, using a random person from the club as a human shield, and starts shooting indiscriminately, killing people around him without any hesitation. Paul is hit, retreats into a stall, and returns fire, managing to wound Knox. He then shoots out the electrical box. When the lights die, he disappears into the crowd of people running for the exits. The detectives get the call about the club shooting and go to the hospital, where one of the victims is willing to talk. That victim is Knox, who gives detailed information and points the investigation directly toward Paul. The detectives go to Paul's office, but he is not there. Paul is hiding in another room in the hospital, using surgical glue and a stapler to close his latest wound. He goes home and finds Frank waiting for him. Frank confronts him directly about everything, and Paul tells his brother that he had to do it because nobody else was going to. The detectives ring the doorbell. Frank answers and tells them Paul is not home. They do not believe him, but they cannot enter without a warrant and leave. Paul's phone rings. It is the hospital telling him that Jordan is awake. He rushes there, and the reunion between father and daughter is warm and real. Paul has to sit beside her and tell her that her mother is dead, causing Jordan to fall apart as Paul holds her. Paul tells Frank he is done, and Frank wants to believe him. A week later, Jordan is well enough to go home. Detectives come to ask her questions about the night of the attack, but Jordan remembers nothing from it. When Paul and Jordan step into the elevator at the hospital, Knox gets in with them. Paul keeps his face completely neutral and says nothing. Knox makes easy conversation with Jordan, and as they part ways in the lobby, Knox tells them he will see them around. Paul goes directly back to the gun shop. This time, he buys weapons legally. That evening after dinner, Jordan goes to her room to get ready for bed. Paul is sitting downstairs when he notices something outside. telling Jordan to get under the stairs and call 911. A man enters through the back door, goes to Paul's bedroom, and shoots at the shape under the covers, but it is just pillows. Another man follows the sound of the shower running in the bathroom, but that is a trap too. Paul shoots him in the head. When the first man comes to investigate, Paul waits in the dark next to the body and shoots him, causing the man to fall over the railing to the floor below. Paul hears something in the basement and goes down. Knox steps out from the shadows and shoots Paul in the shoulder. Paul falls back onto the couch as Knox stands over him. Jordan comes out of the staircase and screams. In the half second that Knox looks toward her, Paul hits a button on the table beside him that opens a hidden compartment, takes out the weapon inside, and shoots Knox. Knox goes down and does not get up. When the police arrive, Paul tells Raines and Jackson that everything happened tonight, that all his injuries are from tonight, and that he bought all the weapons legally after Jordan woke up because he was afraid for her safety. He adds that he is prepared to hand everything over now and that he is done. The detectives look at him for a long moment. They do not fully believe him, but the case is closed. The men responsible for Luce's death are all gone, and they let it go. Sometime later, Paul drives Jordan to New York and drops her at college, where her girlfriend is already waiting. Father and daughter say goodbye, and Paul walks back to his car. On the way, he sees a man snatch a bag from a luggage cart outside the hotel. Paul stops, looks at the man, raises his hand, and points his finger like a gun. The movie ends right there. So what did you think about this story? Tell me in the comments below. And if this recap moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.